to Ask an Ecologist. My name is Suzanne Simpson, and I'm an ecologist for Bayou Land Conservancy in Houston, Texas. And each week, Thursday at 3 p.m., we take your nature questions and talk about all things outdoors. Thank you for joining us again. So this week we're going to chat about something that has been in the local news a lot recently. We've had some dry conditions here this fall, and we've had a few pop-up fires in Splendora, Cleveland area, as well as the Anahuac National Wildlife Refuge near the coast, both of which are totally under control now. But it is a reminder that while flooding really dominates the conversation in terms of our city planning and our need to mitigate in terms of natural disasters, that here in the Houston area, in the East Texas area, we're also certainly susceptible to wildfires. And I'm sure many of you will remember the wildfire in 2011 that affected the Bastrop area. That was the most destructive fire in Texas history, that burned about half of Bastrop State Park and left a very visible scorching burn scar on our landscapes that took a long time for these ecosystems to recover from. So what's the best way to prevent wildfires? Well, my argument would be that more fire is the best way to prevent wildfire. But not just more fire, a different kind of fire. Where we live on the North American coastal plain, fire has been an integral part of our ecosystem for thousands of years. But fire got some really bad PR because of some conflagrations in the late 19th century and early 20th century. And as a result from that, we had about 100 years of endorsed fire suppression throughout our land management in the United States. So the forests, it was sort of the prevailing ideology was that fire had no beneficial consequence to ecosystems or to humans, and that every fire that lit, whether it be a natural fire that was, via lightning strike or an accidental fire, it was suppress, so that all fires would go out. And so as a result, we've had, first of all, generations of the public that have been miseducated about fire and the role of fire in our ecosystems. We have had grassland habitats that have disappeared because of afforestation. Afforestation is whenever a forest is in a place where there was no forest before. So we've basically had habitat conversion of grasslands and prairies into woodlands just because we've lifted these disturbance regimes that have been in place for long periods of time before us. And then also we've had forests. Our forests have been subject to really dangerous levels of fuel loads because there hasn't been regular fire that's able to clean out the understory and reduce the risk of really dangerous fire. So more recently, we've had scientists take another look at fire. They've looked at the consequences of not having fire and the events that come from that. And so they've studied actually what the true role of fire is in our ecosystems. And they found that fire is one of the most critically important disturbance regimes for our ecosystems. It allows for soil and seed bank regeneration, and it leads to the production of highly functioning ecosystems that are incredibly well suited to all kinds of wildlife. But 100 years of fire suppression is a lot to undo. So the difference between prescribed fires and wildfires is, well, there are many. I will talk about a few. Is that prescribed fires, first of all, they burn differently. So in general, prescribed fires are going to burn more slowly, and they're going to burn at a lower temperature. So a slower burning fire means that animals that are in that ecosystem and in the unit that is being burned have time to get out of the path of the active fire, and so you have less loss of wildlife. Also, if you're doing prescribed fires, especially in areas like grasslands where you would have really endemic species that are very specific to that grassland habitat, you would break the fire up into smaller units, and that allows burns over part of a unit, and so the animal has a place to escape to. And so that's really important in parts of burn planning. So you have a slower burning fire and you have a cooler fire overall. So that's going to allow for the soil and seed regeneration, which is, by the way, impossible to duplicate and replicate with any other management practice other than fire, because it's all about those chemical reactions that are heat-based. So it allows for that to happen, but it's not so hot that it's going to destroy every piece of vegetation and the seed bank underneath it in its path. So it burns at a much cooler temperature that is more palatable to ecological restoration. So as part of the solution, you may have noticed that Smokey the Bear's slogan has changed in recent years. It's gone from "only you can prevent forest fires" to "only you can prevent wildfires." So that's one part of the Forest Service initiatives to kind of re-educate the public and get them thinking differently about our relationship to fire. But it isn't enough, or at least it's not enough yet. We need more public acceptance of prescribed burns and more funding support for prescribed burns, especially in areas where you're at the wildland-urban interface. So a good example of this is W.G. Jones State Forest up in Conroe. You know, that state forest was a forest among and surrounded by forest for a very long period of time, but more recently, neighborhoods have popped up all the way around it to where it looks more like a postage stamp surrounded by neighbors. And fire is still a very important management tool for them. So the Forest Service there has worked really hard to communicate with its neighbors and explain, you know, when prescribed burns are happening, what the risks and benefits are, and get some sort of community buy-in to that happening on Forest Service property. And we really need to duplicate that model far and wide. It can be hard to conceive of approving a burn happening in your backyard or near your house, but prescribed burns are controlled and done without incident 99.5% of the time. And there are a few things that we have in our life that are that effective. And in some ways, you can almost think of them as, you know, a fire insurance policy where you're burning things in a controlled way now so that you're mitigating the potential damage to human life and property in the future. So it's a really important planning tool for us to coexist with the ecosystems and the environment that we're all abutting next to in some form or another where we live. So our relationship to fire has been misunderstood. There's been a lot of miseducation for some, number of decades that affected generations, but now we're trying to right those wrongs. Scientists are trying to communicate the benefits of prescribed fire, the benefits of prescribed burns, and how those prescribed burns really help to prevent those incredibly destructive wildfires that we've seen a lot of this summer, and will likely continue to see in years to come unless we're able to implement some of these solutions. So I'd be interested to know your thoughts on prescribed fire, prescribed burns. Would you ever consider having a prescribed burn in a natural area, even if it was, close to where you lived? Let us know in the comments, and be sure to get your questions into Ask an Ecologist. You can comment on this video, you can send us a Facebook message, or you can email us at info@bayouland.org. I'll see you next week. Thanks for tuning in.